Kiri had always been told that humans were monsters, that they lived on dead worlds and ate anything that moved, that they burned planets and chewed bones and drank the screams of those they conquered, and when her small fighter broke apart in the upper layers of a forgotten mining moon. She thought she had reached the end of her life. She expected her body to be torn apart and her name lost to ash. She crashed hard into the dust fields and her armor split, and she crawled through the orange, mist with blood cooling under her skin and pain like fire in her chest. The night was long and cold, and she saw lights moving through the haze and thought those must be the eyes of the human scavengers who had come to eat her. She was wrong. Lights came from a salvage ship called the Warden's Grace, and its crew of miners, engineers, and wanderers worked under the command of Ray Voss, a tall woman with oil-streaked hands and tired eyes. Ray was human through and through, not the monster from the stories, but a calm face that seemed carved by wind and struggle. The humans pulled Kiri from the wreck and spoke in strange, soft tones. Their words warm, even if their world was harsh. They set her on a bunk under a patchwork roof and sealed her wounds with glue gel from an old medkit. Kiri tried to fight, but her limbs failed, and she lay still, watching the humans move around her, waiting for the knives or the fire. The first smell that reached her was not blood, but food, thick, rich, and heavy with spice. The crew gathered around a heater with a pot that bubbled and steamed, and she thought this must be the preparation of her body, and she shook as the humans stirred and ladled the mixture into bowls. Ray crouched beside her and said, "Easy, friend, you need to eat," and held out a metal spoon filled with stew. Kiri stared. The scent hit her senses like lightning. Her hunger roared, and her mind fought itself. One voice said, "This is the trap." The other said, "This is life and warmth." And when she took the first taste, she almost wept. The salt, the smoke, the small pieces of root and meat filled her body with fire and comfort she had not known since before the war. The humans smiled, and one said, "See, she likes it." And laughter rolled through the room. Ray spoke later by the dim light of the console. She told Kiri that this moon had been abandoned by both empires, that the humans stayed because they were stubborn, and that no one else wanted to mine the poisoned dust. Kiri asked why they helped her, and Ray said, "Because you fell out of the sky and needed help." And that was reason enough. Kiri did not understand. She tried to explain that her people saw humans as devourers, but Ray only shook her head and said, "Maybe we are. We devour fear and loneliness and hunger out here. And if you stay long enough, you learn to share what you have before it eats you alive." The days passed, and Kiri began to heal. She watched how the humans worked, how they laughed, how they fought with words but never with knives. She saw the way Ray always checked the smallest tools herself, and how the crew listened without needing orders. Kiri learned their names: the mechanic Brant, who fixed everything with his bare hands; the medic Juno, who kept a flask of old whiskey and claimed it killed germs; the youngest crewman Tavi, who called her wings shiny bug plates and asked 100 questions. Kiri found herself laughing once, and stopped in shock as if joy was forbidden to her. Then came the message, a cold encoded signal that the crew picked up on long-range comms. Ray's face hardened as she read it. It was a command order from the Empire patrol grid. It spoke in the tongue of conquest and obedience. It said, a fugitive vessel carrying a traitor had crashed on Sector 9, and that all inhabitants must surrender the alien alive or face erasure. Ray looked to Kiri, who froze as her throat closed. The Empire had found her. She said that they would kill everyone to silence her, and she begged Ray to hand her over. Ray said no. That night the camp moved in silence. The humans packed gear, weapons, and food. They turned off the outer lights and sealed the dig tunnels. Kiri watched them work with no panic, only purpose. She asked Ray why they risked themselves, and Ray said, "Because that is what humans do when someone is hunted. They make themselves the wall between the hunter and the prey." Kiri wanted to tell her that her people would never understand, that they would call this madness and weakness. Ray simply said, "Then they will learn." When dawn came, a thin sun bled through the clouds. The crew stood ready with pulse rifles and mining charges, and Kiri looked over them and felt something she could not name. It was not loyalty, not yet, but something close to it. She took one of their spare rifles, though it felt strange in her hands, and said, "If I must die, I will die beside those who fed me." Ray smiled and said, "No one dies today," and the first warning blips lit the radar. As Empire ships broke through orbit, the dust rose and the sky began to burn. Kiri looked to the stew pot still warm by the heater and thought that maybe humans did eat something after all. Not flesh, but fear. And that was why the galaxy was wrong about them. The ships came down like steel storms and the ground shook, but the humans did not run. Ray's voice cut through the noise, steady and alive. She said, "Remember, we feed each other. We fight together. And if we burn bright." The crew roared their answer, and the first blast hit the ridge. Kiri raised her weapon. Her heart thundered, and for the first time in her life she was not afraid of being eaten. She was afraid of losing these strange, fearless creatures who treated her like family, and the battle for the truth about humans began under a red rising sun. Kiri stood beside the humans while smoke crawled across the red sky. The battle had passed like a storm of fire and noise, and the mining camp was broken, but still alive. Ray moved through the wreckage, her voice calm, giving orders to gather wounded and check oxygen filters. Kiri helped where she could. She lifted beams and dragged power cells, and every time she looked up, she saw another human still moving, still fighting to keep life in the camp. The enemy ships had left orbit after losing 2 patrols to the humans. Crude defense traps. The Empire would return, and everyone knew it. But for now, the humans had won a breath of time. Kiri sat near the stew pot that still burned faintly and stared at the steam, thinking that no one in the galaxy would believe what she had seen. Later, Ray joined her, sitting on a piece of broken hull plate. She handed Kiri a metal cup of something hot and said, "Drink it, Will." Help. Kiri asked why they did not fear death. Ray smiled and said, "Fear is fine. It just cannot drive the ship." Kiri thought of her people and how every order came with fear, how obedience was stitched into the blood of her kind. She said, "Your people do not obey, you live." Ray said, "Maybe we do both sometimes, but when the universe tries to break you, you learn to bend your own way." In the next days, Kiri learned more about these strange humans. They were not soldiers, but builders and scavengers. They joked as they repaired what was left of the camp. Brant welded new armor onto the loader drones while Tavi painted a blue streak across its head, calling it Lucky Charm. Juno set up her med bay inside a cargo crate and cursed every bandage she had. To cut with dull scissors, Kiri helped them carry crates of ore, and she began to feel her strength return, her mind clearer than it had been in months. One evening, Ray gathered everyone near the heater. She had decoded part of the signal the Empire sent, and her voice turned grim. The message said that more hunter groups were coming, led by Commander Solus, who was known for burning settlements to set examples. Kiri's hands trembled when she heard that name. Solus had led the raid that destroyed her colony, and she still remembered the sound of the screams and the cold voice that said humans will be next. Ray looked around at her crew and said, "We cannot stay here. We move to the ridge caves and take what we can carry." Tavi asked, "What about the civvies in Sector 4? Ray said, "We get them too. We do not leave people behind." As night fell, the camp became a hive of motion. Lights dimmed to red-toned shadows stretched across the dust, and the humans loaded trucks and rigs. Kiri stood near Ray and said, "Solus will not stop until he has me." Ray said, "Then we make sure he fails," and she handed Kiri a rifle and a pack of rations. Kiri said, "Why give me a weapon? I brought this trouble," Ray said. "Because you are here now, and that makes you one of us." On the road to the ridge, Kiri rode on the back of a crawler, watching the stars roll above the humans. Spoke of food and songs and old homeworlds they missed. They did not speak of fear. They carried it quietly, like another tool in their belt. When they reached the caves, they set up barriers and signal jammers. Brant fixed the generator with a hammer. Juno grumbled about dust in her lungs, and Ray stood on the edge of the ridge, scanning the horizon. Kiri joined her. Ray said, "You still think we eat people?" Kiri said, "No. I think you eat danger." Ray laughed soft and said, "Maybe." The next morning, Kiri woke to an odd sound like distant thunder. The radar blinked red. Solus had arrived. His fleet spread across the sky with silver lines like claws. Ray ordered everyone into positions, mines set along the ridge, turrets powered up. Kiri stood by the entrance, clutching the rifle. Solus's voice came through the comm, a deep, cold sound saying, "Deliver the traitor or face extinction." Ray took the transmitter and said, "Come take her if you dare." And then she crushed the device under her boot. The battle that followed felt like the world tearing open. Empire soldiers dropped from ships like metal rain. but the humans used the caves like a shield. Kiri fired until her arms shook. Ray led charges through smoke and debris. Tavi crawled into tunnels to rig explosives under enemy walkers. Juno dragged wounded men back to cover and never stopped moving. Brant shouted that the main gun was overheating. Ray yelled to let it burn, and they fired until the barrel glowed red. When night came again, the ridge was littered with wreckage. Solus pulled back his troops, but his flagship stayed in orbit. Kiri stood among the ruins, breathing hard, her armor cracked. Ray came to her side, her hair blackened by soot. Kiri said he will come again. Ray said yes, but now he knows we bite. Kiri said, why fight for me? Ray said, because if we let one lie stand, we all live in its shadow. You are proof that the Empire is afraid of the truth. That night, Kiri sat by the fire surrounded by humans, laughing, weak and tired. She watched them share stew. The same pot, the same smell she remembered from the first night. She lifted her bowl and took a sip and realized that every meal here was more than food. It was a promise they would stand together no matter what she thought about Solus, about her people, about the stories of monsters that ate flesh. And she smiled to herself because she knew now the truth was far stranger. Humans ate fear, and they digested it into courage. Far above the broken ridge, Solus looked down from his ship and ordered his crew to track the human base, but inside his mind a question began to grow. He had seen those humans fight, and something about their madness unsettled him. He told himself they were beasts, but deep down, he wondered what kind of beast risks extinction. For someone who once called them a monster. He turned away from the window, but the thought did not leave him. And as the stars shifted and the dust settled, Ray walked through the camp, checking on her people. Kiri followed her and said, "What now?" Ray said, "Now, we prepare. Because this was only the first storm, and we are still breathing, and as long as we breathe, we fight together." Kiri looked at the sky and whispered to herself that maybe humans were not born to eat flesh, but to eat the impossible and somehow make it theirs. And the wind carried her words through the caves like a vow for the battle still to come. The third sunrise over the ridge came with silence thick as smoke. The humans worked through the wreckage, patching armor plates, sealing wounds, and collecting power cells from the dead Empire drones. Ray moved among them, speaking little, but her voice carried through every gust of wind and gave the crew a rhythm that kept them steady. Kiri felt the ache in her body, but refused to rest. She could not watch these humans rebuild, and not help. She had once believed that strength came from command, from obedience, from fear. Now she saw it came from hands scarred by work, from laughter echoing through pain, from the way they leaned on each other when breath grew short. The sky above still shimmered faintly with the trails of Solus's fleet, and everyone knew he would return. Ray gathered the team inside the largest cave and spread a hollow map made from salvaged scanners. Lines flickered weakly across the rock wall showing Empire patrols and resource points. She pointed to a zone far from the ridge, a crashed ship identified as a research transport. If the humans could reach it, they might find data about the control web Solus used to track their signals. Brant said, "That area is suicide," but Ray answered softly, "Everything worth doing starts there." Kiri stepped forward and said she would go. The humans looked at her with quiet eyes, not of mistrust, but of measuring courage. Ray nodded and said, "Then you lead, because you know how they think and we will follow, because that is what humans do." The trip through the wasteland began under a gray sky. The crawler engines hummed and the crew kept radios off to avoid scans. Dust storms rolled in waves, turning the air into a river of orange. The world felt endless and empty, yet full of hidden eyes. Kiri sat beside Tavi, who asked endless questions about her world, about what food they had, what games children played. Kiri answered slowly, describing the floating cities and the scent gardens and how laughter was trained out of them by age 6. Tavi frowned and said, "That sounds worse than hunger." Kiri could not disagree when they stopped for rest. Ray handed her a ration bar and said, "You will not like it, but it keeps you alive." Kiri took a bite. It tasted of metal and salt, but it warmed her chest. By the third day, they reached the canyon that hid the broken ship. Its hull was half buried in sand, its symbols faded by years. Kiri felt her pulse rise. As they entered, she recognized it as an old science vessel from her empire, one that studied control frequencies Ray ordered the team to split. Juno searched for power cores. Brant set charges in case they needed a quick exit. Kiri moved to the central chamber and found a sealed console covered in dust. She brushed it clean and the lights flickered weakly. She entered her old access codes and the screen came alive, showing fragments of data and a map of the Empire's relay system. She saw something that froze her. Humans were immune to the mind-scent waves that controlled most species not by accident, but by design. The ancient files spoke of experiments from centuries ago. Humans had been declared unstable, unfit for enslavement. So the Empire had turned them into myths to keep others afraid. Ray entered behind her, reading the glowing text. Her jaw tightened. She said, "So they feared us long before we even reached the stars." Kiri said, "They feared what they could not control." Ray said, "Then, that is our advantage," Brant called over the comm. That movement was picking up to the east, and within moments the walls trembled. Empire scouts had found them. Kiri and Ray grabbed the data core and ran. The humans moved through the narrow canyon, firing short bursts and using the dust for cover. The sound of rifles echoed like thunder. Kiri turned once to see a drone aim at Ray. She threw herself in front and the blast hit her shoulder, burning through armor. She fell, but Ray dragged her up, shouting, "Not yet." The fight raged for minutes that felt like hours. Brant triggered his charges, collapsing the canyon mouth and sealing their exit behind a wall of fire. The team climbed through the smoke with lungs full of grit, finally reaching the crawlers at the ridge. Juno patched Kiri's wound while Ray drove them hard back toward the caves. Kiri drifted in and out of sleep, hearing fragments of human voices telling jokes to keep fear away. By the time they reached the base, night had fallen and stars glittered cold above. In the cave, Ray placed the data core on the table. The crew gathered around as the projection rose, maps of worlds, of relay towers, of control webs covering half the galaxy, all tied to one hub deep in the Empire. Core, Ray said, "This is it, the center of their chains. If we hit this, we can break the control on hundreds of worlds." Juno said, "We are miners, not soldiers." Ray said, "Miners know how to make things fall, and that is what we will do." Kiri looked at them, her heart heavy and proud. She said, "My people will come again and they will not show mercy." Ray said, "Then, they will meet something new later, when most of the crew slept." Kiri stood outside the cave, watching the horizon. Faint lights marked the Empire, patrols sweeping across the sky. Ray joined her and asked what she was thinking. Kiri said, "I was raised to believe humans destroy everything they touch. Now, I see you build in the ruins." Ray said, "We build because ruins are all we are given." She looked at the stars and said, "Maybe one day we will build something that lasts." Kiri said, "Perhaps that is why the Empire fears you. Not your weapons, but your will." Ray smiled faintly and said, "Maybe fear is the only thing we ever managed to teach them before." Dawn alarms blared. Scouts reported ships descending again, this time more than before, a fleet of hunters preparing to surround the ridge. Ray turned to the crew. Her eyes burning with resolve, she said, "If they want to see monsters, we will show them. What kind of monsters? Humans truly are not the kind that eat flesh, but the kind that never stop fighting." Kiri took her place beside them, feeling no longer an outsider but part of this stubborn family. The dust began to rise as engines roared overhead, and the third battle for the truth about humans was about to begin. Kiri followed Ray and the crew across the dead moon, where the cold wind cut through their suits and dust blew like sharp glass against their faces. The ridge caves had been abandoned for days as the humans moved toward a hidden dig site marked by data from the last raid. The site was ancient and long forgotten, filled with remnants of a civilization that had mined this moon. Centuries ago, the corridors twisted and opened into a vast chamber where a strange ring lay half buried in stone, and when Kiri stepped closer, her hands tingled, as though the ring recognized her touch. She could not explain it, but it pulsed with energy, waiting for someone who was human enough to awaken it. Ray ordered the crew to spread out the perimeter while Kiri examined the ring. Its surface glimmered faintly, like it had been waiting for them. Her mind brushed against images of hidden paths of subspace tunnels and old relay systems that the Empire had long since abandoned. She touched the ring and it reacted to her presence, mapping a route that no scout or patrol could detect. Kiri realized the ring was not a weapon, but a key, a tool to move through space without detection. A relic, built to be used by those who could resist control, and her people could not activate it. Kale, a small alien scout who had joined them, looked at her with a mixture of awe and fear and said, "This is impossible." She said, "It is possible." And Ray said, "Then we use it." The humans set up temporary camp around the dig site with generators and heaters, and Kiri taught them how to move carefully through the ring paths, testing one route that led them deep into enemy territory without being detected. The first trip was tense. The tunnels shifted and pulsed under their feet, and every wrong step could leave them trapped or exposed. But the humans adapted quickly. They moved like water slipping through rocks, and Kiri could not believe how fearless they were even when faced with alien traps and the first prisoners appeared before them. Their eyes wide with disbelief. They had been controlled for months, some for years, and when the humans touched their hands, they felt warmth and hope. Ray explained to Kiri that the Empire's control web used scent signals and implanted collars, and that these prisoners had been drained of autonomy. But when a human came near, the signals failed because the resonance was incompatible. Kiri felt a surge of pride. She had never thought humans could be so important in her war against her own empire. And she realized that the stories of humans eating each other were wrong. The only thing they consumed was oppression. They swallowed it whole and turned it into freedom. The rescued prisoners clung to their saviors, crying, laughing, and shouting at once. For the first time in years, they felt safe, and it was a revelation that moved Kiri deeply. As the convoy moved through hidden routes, the Empire scouts noticed anomalies in the signal patterns. They traced the echoes back to the dig site, and a small squad of shock troops landed nearby. Kiri and Ray quickly formed a plan using the ring paths to confuse the attackers appearing here and vanishing there, making the humans seem everywhere at once. The fight was fast and chaotic. The humans used the terrain to their advantage, collapsing tunnels and triggering old mining traps, while Kiri directed movements, guiding the freed prisoners through corridors. The aliens underestimated the humans' ability to think and adapt, and within hours the squad retreated, leaving the humans in control of the site and the prisoners free. Kiri watched the prisoners settle and share food and water with their rescuers. She saw children laughing for the first time in months. She saw adults weeping and hugging strangers who had risked everything to save them. She saw the humans laugh and argue over minor tasks like who carried the heaviest load or who cleaned the messiest corridor. She realized the Empire had never understood them, not the humans and not the way they shared survival. They were not soldiers alone, but builders and protectors, and Kiri felt something shift inside her. She felt loyalty and respect stronger than any fear her people had taught her to honor. That night around the campfires, the humans discussed the next move. Ray spread out the maps showing the location of relay hubs controlling vast numbers of worlds. Kiri studied them, tracing the lines that led from the Empire core to frontier sectors. She realized that hitting these points simultaneously could disrupt control on multiple worlds at once. Kyle said it would take a fleet. Ray said, "We do not have a fleet, but we have cunning and speed," and the humans had the ability to move where no one else could. The conversation turned to strategy, to who would lead, which path to coordinate attacks. Kiri suggested a route through a collapsed star tunnel that no one had dared traverse in centuries. Ray grinned and said, "Then you lead it." And Kiri felt a thrill she had never known. Over the next days, the team tested several more ring paths, moving prisoners and supplies undetected. Kiri grew closer to the humans. She watched how they helped each other. When someone faltered, they lifted them up. When someone doubted, they spoke words that reminded them of purpose. She learned to trust them in a way she had never trusted any of her own kind. She saw hope in small gestures, like Juno handing a water flask to a child without being asked, and Brant showing a broken toy drone to Tavi, who grinned and called it a dragon. Kiri understood finally that the Empire's fear of humans was not because they were strong, but because they were unpredictable in the best way. When scouts reported a convoy of prisoners from the central sector moving toward a control hub, Ray decided it was time to act. The humans prepared to move swiftly Through the newly mapped paths, Kiri touched the ring once more and felt the surge of power. The paths unlocked just for her. She led the first group through the tunnels, the humans following her movements perfectly. Each step precise but fluid, the first hub came into view massive and guarded. Yet the humans appeared from shadows, striking quickly, disabling systems and releasing prisoners. The captives stared in disbelief that humans had come for them not to enslave, but to free. And the emotion hit Kiri and the humans alike. It was a triumph, not of war but of defiance. As they regrouped back at the dig site, Ray looked at Kiri and said, "This is only the beginning." Kiri nodded. She knew the Empire would retaliate stronger and faster. But now, she had seen the humans in their truest form, fearless and compassionate, cunning and kind, and she could not wait to fight beside them again. The prisoners were fed, clothed, and tended, and for the first time in a long time, Kiri slept with a sense of hope and belonging. She knew that the ring paths and the humans together could change everything, and she whispered quietly to herself that the Empire had no idea what it was up against. The morning sun cast long shadows over the ruined landscape, and the humans moved with practiced efficiency. Ray checked the convoy one last time, while Kiri adjusted her gear and scanned the horizon. A faint hum of engines told them the Empire was aware of their position, and this time they had brought a dreadnought, a massive warship designed to crush everything beneath its weight. Solus had returned, and this time he intended to make an example out of the humans for rescuing Kiri and disrupting his patrols. Kiri felt her chest tighten as she looked at Ray and said, "We have to stop him." Ray nodded, her eyes steady. "We do not run from this one, we meet it together." The humans loaded what supplies they could onto the crawlers and prepared traps along the approach to the ridge. The prisoners they had freed moved with them, carrying essential equipment and offering support in small ways. Kiri watched the children with wonder as they lifted crates and adjusted scanners. She realized that these humans not only fought but inspired others to stand, and that was the most dangerous weapon the Empire could never measure. Brant rigged explosives along the tunnels while Tavi and a small team moved stealthily to higher ground, setting marks for precision strikes. Kiri walked beside Ray, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than her armor yet lighter than fear. When the dreadnought appeared over the horizon, it cast a shadow that swallowed the ridge in darkness. The engines screamed, and dust spiraled into the air. Solus's voice came over the comm, commanding surrender and threatening death, and the crew ignored it. The humans had learned already that fear was not a chain, but a tool, and Ray raised her hand, signaling the beginning of the counterattack. Kiri activated a set of ring paths hidden within the caves and watched as small groups of humans and freed prisoners vanished and reappeared behind enemy lines, striking silently, disabling weapons and confusing sensors. Kiri led a team through one of the ring paths, appearing directly on the dreadnought's lower deck. They moved swiftly, using stolen uniforms and false signals to blend in. The corridors smelled of ozone and oil. The Empire officers glanced at them but thought them crew members, until Kiri and her team sabotaged the control nodes, feeding the subspace signals that controlled the hunters outside. Solus realized too late that the humans had learned his tricks, and the dreadnought shuddered as the first wave of explosions hit the engines and weapon nodes. The humans appeared everywhere at once and yet moved with precision. Kiri felt exhilaration mixed with dread, because Ray and the convoy were still exposed. Above, Ray commanded from the ridge using the remaining scanners and weapon emplacements. She coordinated strikes with Kiri and the teams inside the dreadnought. Every pulse rifle, every mining charge, every improvised weapon was used to maximum effect. The Empire soldiers were disoriented by the human tactic appearing and disappearing. Seemingly everywhere, Kiri moved with purpose through the hallways, guiding freed prisoners and rigging more sabotage while avoiding patrols. And the hum of the engine beneath her felt alive, like the dreadnought knew it was being turned against itself. The battle reached a critical point when Solus personally entered the lower deck, expecting to catch Ray and the humans off guard. Kiri confronted him in the corridor. She moved with speed and precision. She dodged energy bursts and countered, with techniques she had never been taught but learned from watching humans fight. She realized that Solus had underestimated the humans not because they were weak, but because they did not fight like anyone else. They fought as one with courage and cunning. and when she landed a strike that disabled his suit, she called for the rest of the crew to move the prisoners and sweep the corridors free. Above the ridge, the convoy executed Ray's plan. With precision, the humans lured patrols into narrow passages where mining charges detonated, collapsing them and cutting off reinforcements. Explosions lit the dawn and smoke rolled over the ridges, giving the impression of a larger force than was present. The freed prisoners moved with courage. Inspired by what they had seen from humans who risked everything for them, Kiri watched from within the dreadnought as lights flickered and corridors collapsed, and she realized that this was more than survival. This was a statement that humans did not bow and they did not kneel in the chaos. Solus attempted one final countermeasure, activating a failsafe to flood the ship with toxic gas. Kiri called out to Ray, who was coordinating the strike above. She said, "The gas will kill them if we do not move now." Ray adjusted the plan, redirecting teams through alternate ring paths, and the humans executed with near-flawless timing. Prisoners and crew alike moving through tunnels and vents, Kiri led the last group to safety on the ridge just as the dreadnought shuddered and groaned under the pressure of human sabotage and ring interference. Once the dust settled and the dreadnought was crippled, Ray and Kiri stood side by side surveying the field. The humans were exhausted but alive, and the prisoners were cheering their new freedom. Kiri looked at Ray and said, "We saved them all." Ray shook her head. "We did not save all, but we made sure they could live another day. And that is enough for now," Kiri realized. The magnitude of what they had accomplished. The Empire's myth of humans as mindless devourers had been shattered by actions rooted in courage and compassion, and the dreadnought that once symbolized their fear now lay in pieces, a testament to the strength humans wielded. As the crew regrouped, Kiri walked among them, speaking to freed prisoners, answering questions, teaching them small things about survival. She saw the laughter in children's eyes and the determination in adults who had once been slaves, and she knew the Empire had underestimated humans in every way. Ray approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We are not done," Kiri said. "I know, but we showed them what we are capable of." Ray smiled faintly, then said, "Now we prepare for the next fight," and Kiri nodded, feeling a bond that could not be broken. She looked to the stars, knowing that the humans would rise again stronger than before, and that she would stand with them no matter the storm that came their way. The humans moved like shadows across the cratered landscape. Their footsteps careful but determined, the convoy had regrouped, and prisoners freed from the last raid were being tended to. Kiri walked beside Ray, scanning the horizon for any signs of Empire patrols. Solus had retreated, but only temporarily. The humans knew he would return with reinforcements, and the key relay hub that controlled much of the Empire's mind web still stood intact. Kiri touched the ring they had discovered at the dig site and felt the pulse of energy hum under her hands. It responded only to humans, and for the first time she understood that it was not just a path through space. It was a tool to turn the tables, a way to strike at the heart of the Empire without being seen. Ray gathered the crew inside a hollowed-out canyon where dust storms could hide their movements. She spread a map of the Empire network showing multiple relay points across several systems, each one a node feeding the control signal to thousands of worlds. The humans would have to move simultaneously, striking at multiple points while using the ring paths to remain undetected. It was a dangerous plan, but one that could break the Empire's reach. Kiri traced the routes with her finger and realized the precision needed. Each step had to be exact timing perfect, or they would be cut off and slaughtered. The humans divided into teams. Kiri led one toward the central node. She walked with Kale, a small alien scout who had learned to trust humans despite his people's fear and hatred. They moved through hidden ring paths, appearing suddenly on enemy stations and disappearing just as quickly. The humans worked with quiet efficiency, disabling control panels, releasing prisoners, and planting signals to confuse any incoming patrols. The first contact was brief and violent. The humans moved as one, using their environment. The corridors tight and dark to their advantage. Every shot precise, every movement coordinated. Kyle watched, in awe, as the humans executed a strategy that no one could predict, and for the first time he questioned everything his empire had taught him. Meanwhile, Ray coordinated the other teams from a command post in a hidden canyon. She communicated through secure channels, directing teams to target relay points and rescue prisoners. Her voice calm but firm, giving the humans the rhythm they needed. Kiri moved deeper into the enemy core. Using the ring paths, the tunnels shifted around them, a living maze that would have trapped anyone else but the humans adapted. They flowed through each corridor, reacting instantly to obstacles and surprises. The prisoners moved with them, carrying supplies and helping where they could. It was a dance of chaos, and control the humans turned every danger into an advantage, and Kiri felt the thrill of being part of something greater than herself. As they approached the main hub, Kiri saw Solus waiting, surrounded by elite guards. He had anticipated their approach, but he had not counted on humans moving through paths he could not track. Kiri raised her weapon and led the first strike. The corridors exploded with energy pulses and the hum of sabotage machines. The humans moved fast and precise, using every advantage the tunnels offered. Solus lashed out, but the humans were everywhere, appearing behind him, and alongside the prisoners who had been freed from other nodes. They surged like a tide. Kiri realized that this was not just a fight. It was a message. Humans never stopped fighting and never bent under fear. Inside the hub, Kiri and Ray finally met Solus in the central chamber. He tried to intimidate them with threats of annihilation and commands for surrender. Kiri stepped forward and said that humans eat only fear and lies. They digest oppression and turn it into freedom. She swung into action, and the fight became a blur of movement. Humans and prisoners joining together, striking guards and disabling control systems. Solus realized too late that his command had failed. The signals in the hub were being inverted. The collars on prisoners fell silent and systems began to malfunction. The humans had taken the web that enslaved worlds and were turning it into a network of liberation. Outside the hub, the other teams had finished their strikes. The relay points across multiple systems flickered offline as control signals inverted, and prisoners cheered as their collars fell inactive, and ships that had been under mind control broke free and took action on their own. The humans had not only survived the assault but were changing the balance of power across entire sectors. Kiri watched as the network of oppression collapsed under human ingenuity and courage. It was a sight she had never imagined her entire life. She felt a surge of pride that she had been allowed to fight alongside them. As the dust settled, Kiri and Ray regrouped with the rest of the crew. The hub was secure, the prisoners liberated, and the Empire forces in retreat. Kiri looked at the humans who had fought tirelessly beside her. She realized that the myths her people had told were false. Humans did not consume flesh. They consumed fear and oppression and transformed it into hope and resistance. Kyle approached her, his expression a mixture of respect and wonder. He said, "Your people are extraordinary." Kiri shook her head and said, "No, the humans are extraordinary, and I am honored to stand with them." Ray turned to the crew and said, "The fight is over, for now. But the galaxy is watching what we have done." Kiri looked to the sky at stars that seemed brighter than before, and whispered, "That humans will not kneel." She realized that the bonds formed here would last far beyond this battle. The freed, prisoners and crew members alike had seen the truth that humans would fight for each other no matter the cost, and that truth would spread across worlds like wildfire. Kiri felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had found a family among humans, and that together they could challenge any empire. As night fell over the hub, Kiri and Ray stood side by side, watching the stars and planning the next moves. The humans cleaned their equipment, tended the wounded, and shared stories of bravery and survival. Kiri listened and laughed, and for the first time in her life felt completely at home. She knew that the Empire would not forget this defeat, but she also knew that the humans had shown what they were capable of, that their will could not be broken, and their courage could not be measured. And she whispered quietly to herself that the galaxy had never seen anything like them, and that she would never forget the night when humans turned fear into victory. The aftermath of the hub assault left the galaxy in a quiet, tense lull. The Empire forces had retreated, their fleet scattered and confused by the sudden inversion of their control signals. Kiri stood atop a ridge overlooking the hub and the liberated prisoners moving freely through corridors that had once been filled with fear. She could see the humans working alongside the freed civilians, tending to the wounded, repairing damaged systems, and securing what remained. Ray joined her, carrying a small datapad with new intel, and said, "We did more than Survive. Kiri turned to her and asked, "What now?" Ray said. "Now we make sure the galaxy remembers what humans can do." The freed prisoners looked at the humans with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Their voices filled the canyon as they called out thanks, and names and stories of what they had endured. Kiri watched as children ran through open corridors laughing for the first time since being captured, and adults embraced those who had saved them. She realized that this simple act of compassion and courage was a weapon far greater than any gun or ship the humans had used. It was the proof of what they truly were, and that proof would ripple across systems challenging every empire lie. And Ray gathered the crew at a temporary command station. Built from salvaged parts, the human survivors and the freed prisoners stood in lines listening to her voice, calm but full of authority. She said, "The Empire will come back, but now they know we are not to be underestimated. Every relay we inverted, every prisoner freed is a warning. The humans are not devourers, we are creators and protectors. We build in the ruins, we fight for those who cannot, and we never kneel." The crew nodded, and Kiri felt pride swell inside her. She had once believed humans were monsters, and now she knew they were heroes. Kiri walked through the hub speaking to the prisoners, showing them how to operate the machinery and how to stay safe. She watched as children touched panels and laughed as lights flickered. Responding to their hands, adults helped each other carry supplies and repair walls. It was a scene of hope and resilience, and Kiri realized that humans did not just survive adversity, they transformed it into something beautiful. She turned to Ray and said, "Your people are unlike anything my empire ever imagined." Ray smiled faintly and said, "We do what we must to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Solus attempted a last-ditch attack from orbit, but the humans had anticipated the move using the ring paths they had established escape routes and diversion points. The dreadnoughts and cruisers that had followed were caught in a web of mines and scrambled signals, and Kiri watched as enemy ships faltered, unable to regain control systems that once enslaved thousands of minds. The humans had turned the Empire's own technology against them, and the stars above burned with the light of freedom as prisoners shouted and cheered, knowing that their chains had been broken. Back at the ridge, Kiri and Ray oversaw the cleanup. The humans and freed civilians worked together, moving debris, repairing transport vehicles, and tending to those still weak from captivity. It was a scene of unity Kiri had never seen in her own people. Where fear had ruled, humans showed empathy and courage side by side. She thought about the battles fought, the lives risked, and the trust formed, and realized that this was the essence of humanity: not power, not violence, but the refusal to submit and the will to protect others, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As night fell over the liberated hub, the humans gathered around the last fire. Kiri sat beside Ray, watching the glow on the faces of the crew and prisoners. She saw smiles and tears and knew that every act of bravery had forged bonds that could never be broken. Ray looked at her and said, "We saved them today, but the galaxy is watching. They will learn that humans are not to be feared for what we eat, but for what we defend." Kiri nodded and whispered that she would stand with them to the very end, that she would fight alongside humans until every world could know freedom. The crew carved names of the fallen into the hull of the main transport, a silent tribute to those who had given everything to ensure victory. Kiri touched the markings and thought of those who would never return yet. Their courage lived in every human she had fought beside, every prisoner who had been freed, and in the ring paths that now connected worlds unseen and untouched by the Empire. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, each pulse a promise that humanity would endure and rise above fear and oppression. In the quiet moments, Kiri stood with children who had been rescued, teaching them to operate simple equipment, showing them that the universe could be more than chains and fear. She saw their eyes light with wonder and hope, and realized that the smallest acts of care could ripple outward farther than any weapon could reach. Ray watched her from a distance and said, "They will never forget you." Kiri smiled for the first time freely. She knew that humans had taught her the meaning of courage and loyalty, and that she had found a place where she belonged. As the convoy prepared to depart the ridge, Kiri and Ray stood on the edge of the cliff, watching the stars stretch across the horizon. Kiri said, "The Empire will never stop trying to control others." Ray nodded and said, "No, but they will remember this day when humans rose and refused to bow, when humans fed hope to the fearful and courage to the oppressed." Kiri felt the wind on her face, and whispered that the galaxy would see the truth and the humans will always rise to protect it. The transports lifted off the moon, the freed prisoners waving from below, and the humans standing beside them on the decks. Kiri watched as the rings of light opened paths through space, invisible and untouchable, guiding them safely toward new worlds the stars reflected in her eyes. And she realized that this was not just the end of a battle but the beginning of a new chapter, a universe that would know that humans did not eat flesh. They consumed fear. They destroyed chains and they built freedom. She turned to Ray and said, "We will go together and they will follow their own path guided by courage and hope." And in that moment Kiri knew that the story of humans and their courage would echo through the galaxy, that those who had once feared them would speak of them in awe, and those who had doubted would learn that humans do not kneel, they do not break, and they do not consume what they cannot bear. They transform it into power and freedom. The convoy disappeared into the stars, leaving the ridge behind a symbol of resilience, a monument of hope and a promise that wherever fear and oppression rose, humans would follow, and they would fight together. And Kiri whispered to the stars that the galaxy would never forget the day humanity stood tall.